In the caves of Iwo Jima, Japanese soldiers heard a sound they'd never encountered before. Not the crack of rifle fire, not the whistle of artillery, a deep, mechanical roar, followed by screaming. Within seconds, flames traveling at 40 yards filled their bunkers, turning reinforced concrete positions into crematoriums. The Japanese Imperial Army had prepared for bullets, grenades, and bayonets. They had not prepared for the M2 flamethrower, a weapon so terrifying that Japanese soldiers would abandon positions they'd sworn to defend to the death, just to escape the flames. Today, we're examining one of the most psychologically devastating weapons of the Pacific War, and how American innovation in portable flamethrower technology changed the nature of island warfare forever. To understand why the M2 flamethrower became essential, we need to understand the nightmare American Marines faced in the Pacific. After Guadalcanal, the Japanese learned a brutal lesson. They couldn't defeat America in open battle, so they changed tactics entirely. Starting in 1943, Japanese engineers created some of the most sophisticated defensive networks in military history. On islands like Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, Japanese forces dug deep. Not trenches, not foxholes, entire underground cities. On Iwo Jima alone, the Japanese constructed over 11 miles of tunnel connecting 1,500 rooms. Bunkers built from reinforced concrete, steel plates from destroyed ships, and volcanic rock. Some positions had walls 3 feet thick. Artillery positions were built into cave mouths with interlocking fields of fire. Machine gun nests were positioned so that approaching them from one angle meant exposing yourself to fire from 2 others. But the caves were the real nightmare. Natural volcanic caves expanded into multi-level defensive positions. A single cave complex might have multiple entrances, interconnecting tunnels allowing defenders to relocate, stockpiles of ammunition and supplies for weeks, protected positions for wounded soldiers, spider holes for snipers to emerge, fire, and disappear. One Marine officer on Peleliu described it as fighting an enemy you can't see, who can appear anywhere and disappear just as quickly. American forces tried everything to break these positions. Rifles and machine guns, bullets bounced off concrete or disappeared into dark cave mouths, hitting nothing. Hand grenades? Japanese soldiers simply retreated deeper into tunnels, waited for the explosion, then returned to their positions. Artillery and naval bombardment? The massive pre-invasion bombardments that pulverized surface structures barely scratched underground fortifications. On Peleliu, the Navy fired over 2,000 tons of shells at the island before the Marines landed. When they hit the beach, they found the Japanese defenders almost completely intact, waiting in their caves. Satchel charges and demolitions? Effective, but you had to get close enough to place them, which meant crossing open ground under machine gun fire. Casualty rates for demolition teams were catastrophic. At Tarawa in November 1943, Marines suffered over 3,000 casualties taking a tiny island just 2 miles long. At Peleliu in September 1944, what was supposed to be a 4-day operation turned into 2 months of cave-to-cave fighting. The 1st Marine Division suffered 60% casualties. American commanders realized they needed a weapon specifically designed for this type of warfare. They needed something that could reach deep into caves and bunkers, clear multiple connected positions, neutralize defenders without requiring direct line of sight, break the enemy's will to resist. They needed fire. The United States military had experimented with flamethrowers before, but the early models were problematic. The M1 and M1A1 flamethrowers used in 1943 were heavy, unreliable, and had limited range. They leaked, they malfunctioned, and worst of all, they only shot flames about 20 to 25 yards, which meant you had to get dangerously close to use them. In 1944, the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service completely redesigned the portable flamethrower. The result was the M2-2 flamethrower, and it was a game changer. Technical specifications. The M2-2 consisted of 2 cylindrical tanks worn on the operator's back. One tank held 4 gallons of thickened fuel, napalm mixture. One tank held compressed nitrogen propellant at 350 psi. Total weight when loaded, 68 pounds. Effective range, 40 yards, 120 feet. Maximum range, 50+ yards in ideal conditions. Duration of continuous fire, 7 to 9 seconds. Number of bursts, 8 to 10 1-second bursts. The fuel, napalm. The real innovation wasn't just the delivery system. It was what they were delivering. Early flamethrowers used gasoline, which burned quickly but didn't stick to surfaces. In 1942, Harvard chemists developed napalm, a combination of naphthenic and palmitic acids mixed with gasoline. The result was a gel that stuck to any surface it touched, burned at over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, continued burning for 30 to 45 seconds, couldn't be easily extinguished with water, created thick, choking smoke. When napalm entered a confined space like a cave, it didn't just burn. It consumed all available oxygen. Defenders who avoided the flames often died from asphyxiation or carbon monoxide poisoning. Operating an M2-2 flamethrower required specialized training. Marines selected for flamethrower duty underwent weeks of instruction. Physical conditioning, carrying 68 pounds of equipment while moving tactically through rough terrain. Mechanical training, field maintenance, recognizing malfunctions, emergency fuel dump procedures. Tactical employment, approach angles, burst control, target prioritization, coordination with infantry. Safety protocols. The tanks were pressurized and filled with highly flammable material. Mishandling could be fatal. Flamethrower operators never worked alone. Standard doctrine called for a flamethrower team consisting of 1 flamethrower operator, 2 to 4 riflemen for security, often a demolition specialist with satchel charges, a squad leader coordinating with supporting units. The rifleman would suppress enemy positions while the flamethrower operator maneuvered into position. The flamethrower would engage the target. Then demolitions would seal the position if necessary. But beyond the technical specifications, American commanders understood something crucial. The flamethrower wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool of psychological warfare. Japanese soldiers were trained to fight to the death. Their military code emphasized honor in death over the shame of surrender. But facing flames was different. It was primal. No amount of training or indoctrination could override the instinctive human terror of being burned alive. American intelligence officers noted that positions hit with flamethrowers often saw surviving defenders abandon their positions, something that rarely happened with conventional weapons. The sound alone, that deep mechanical roar followed by the whoosh of igniting fuel, became associated with imminent, inescapable death. The M2-2 flamethrower saw its first major use during the assault on Saipan in June 1944. But it was at Peleliu in September 1944 that Marines truly learned how to employ this weapon effectively. Peleliu, the proving ground. Peleliu was a nightmare. The island's central ridge, called Bloody Nose Ridge, was honeycombed with over 500 caves. Japanese Colonel Nakagawa had turned the island into a fortress specifically designed to inflict maximum casualties. He abandoned the traditional beach defense strategy. Instead, he let Marines land unopposed, then subjected them to artillery and mortar fire from hidden positions. Then came the cave fighting. Early attempts to clear caves were disorganized and costly. Marines would approach a cave mouth, take fire, call for supporting fire, then attempt to assault. Casualties were horrific. Then flamethrower teams began developing new tactics. The systematic approach. Reconnaissance. Identify all entrances and exits to a cave system. Isolation. Position security elements to cover all escape routes. Suppression. Use rifle and machine gun fire to force defenders deep into the cave. The burn. Flamethrower team approaches from an angle, delivers sustained burst into cave mouth. Seal or clear. Either demolish the entrance or send in infantry to clear remaining defenders. One Marine flamethrower operator, Corporal William Foster, described his first combat use. We moved up to this cave opening maybe 15 feet across. You could hear Japanese voices inside, see movement in the shadows. I gave them a 3-second burst. The flame went in like a river of fire. The screaming started immediately. Some tried to run out, our rifles got them. The ones who stayed inside. The smoke that came out was black and thick. Nobody came out alive. During the 73-day battle for Peleliu, flamethrower teams were involved in clearing over 300 cave positions. Flamethrower operators suffered 40% casualty rates, but they reduced American infantry casualties by an estimated 60% when clearing fortified positions. The weapon worked, but it came at a terrible cost to the operators themselves. Japanese defenders quickly learned to recognize flamethrower operators. The distinctive tanks on their backs made them priority targets. Japanese snipers and machine gunners would ignore other Marines to shoot the flamethrower operator first. If they could hit the fuel tanks, the results were catastrophic. A punctured fuel tank under pressure could spray napalm over the operator and nearby Marines. If ignited, there was no survival. Despite this, there was never a shortage of volunteers. Marines understood that flamethrowers saved infantry lives, and they trusted their equipment. The M2-2 proved remarkably reliable under combat conditions. If Peleliu was the proving ground, Iwo Jima was the flamethrowers' defining battle. The island was 8 square miles of volcanic rock riddled with tunnels. 21,000 Japanese defenders had spent 8 months fortifying every square foot. American intelligence estimated the battle would last 5 days. It took 36 days of continuous combat. For Iwo Jima, the Marine Corps drastically increased the number of flamethrower teams. Each rifle platoon had at least 2 flamethrower operators. Some companies had dedicated flamethrower squads. Tank-mounted flamethrowers supported the portable units. The island became a laboratory for flamethrower tactics. One of the most famous flamethrower actions occurred during the assault on Mount Suribachi. The volcanic mountain was riddled with defensive positions, pillboxes, bunkers, and caves connected by tunnels. On February 21, 1945, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams led repeated flamethrower attacks against Japanese positions. For 4 hours, Williams moved from pillbox to pillbox. His covering riflemen were wounded or killed. He continued alone. Approaching each position, he would spray flames through the firing ports, then move to the next target. He destroyed 7 Japanese pillboxes and killed dozens of defenders. Williams received the Medal of Honor for his actions. But he later said, "I wasn't being brave. I was just doing what needed to be done. Those pillboxes were killing Marines. The flamethrower could stop them, so that's what I did." During the 36-day battle for Iwo Jima, over 400 flamethrower operators participated in the assault. They cleared an estimated 800-plus cave and bunker positions. Flamethrower teams suffered nearly 50% casualties, but they reduced overall Marine casualties in cave clearing operations by an estimated 70%. Without flamethrowers, American commanders estimated Iwo Jima would have required twice as long to capture and cost thousands more casualties. To understand the full impact of the M2 flamethrower, we need to see it from the other side. Japanese soldiers who survived encounters with flamethrowers left vivid accounts of the experience. Japanese intelligence had limited information about American flamethrower capabilities. They knew Americans possessed flamethrowers. They'd encountered earlier models, but they didn't know about the increased 40-yard range of the M2-2, the napalm fuel that stuck and continued burning, the oxygen-depleting effects in confined spaces, the systematic tactics Americans had developed. Most Japanese defenders expected to face the same close-range flamethrowers from 1943. They positioned their defenses accordingly, typically 20 to 30 yards from cave mouths. This gave them a false sense of security. When Marines first employed the M2-2 against Japanese positions, the psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Those who survived carried burdens few could understand. Corporal Joseph Rebekiewicz, a flamethrower operator on Okinawa, described his experience decades later. "People thank me for my service. They call me a hero. But heroes don't do what I did. Heroes don't burn men alive. I did what needed to be done to save my buddies' lives. Every Marine I saved by burning out a cave was worth it. But that doesn't mean I don't see their faces when I close my eyes. Burning men scream in a way you never forget." The flamethrower raised ethical questions even during the war. Some chaplains and medical personnel questioned whether the weapon was too inhumane. But combat Marines had a different perspective. They'd seen what happened when trying to clear caves with rifles and grenades. They'd watched friends cut down by machine gun fire from positions that seemed impossible to neutralize. The flamethrower saved American lives. In the brutal calculus of war, that was what mattered. For Japanese defenders, the flamethrower represented total war at its most terrible. Trapped in caves, facing an enemy with overwhelming firepower and resources, they now confronted a weapon that negated their defensive advantages. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Japanese military culture had prepared soldiers to face death with honor. But burning to death in a cave, or suffocating in smoke and chemical fumes, offered no honor, just terror and agony. After World War II, both American operators and Japanese survivors struggled with the memories. Many flamethrower operators suffered from what we now recognize as PTSD. Some refused to talk about their experiences for decades. Others, like Medal of Honor recipient Herschel Woody Williams, dedicated their lives to honoring fallen comrades and educating new generations about the realities of war. Japanese survivors often faced social stigma. Having survived when so many died was viewed with suspicion in post-war Japan. A Japanese survivor from Paliliu, Private Yamaguchi, was interviewed after the war. "We heard a sound like a large animal roaring. Then we saw fire coming toward our position from much farther away than we thought possible. It reached into our cave like a demon's hand. Men in the front positions were covered in burning liquid that would not stop burning. They're screaming. I still hear it. Some ran outside and were shot. Others tried to move deeper into the tunnels, but the smoke followed them. We could not breathe. The choice was burn, suffocate, or run outside to be shot." Japanese military culture emphasized discipline and willingness to die for the emperor. Soldiers were taught that surrender was the ultimate dishonor. On Saipan and Paliliu, Japanese soldiers demonstrated this conditioning, fighting to the last man in countless positions. But flamethrowers broke this conditioning. American after-action reports noted that positions hit with flamethrowers showed the highest rates of enemy soldiers attempting to flee or surrender. The primal fear of fire overrode military training. Japanese commanders tried to adapt to the flamethrower threat. They implemented several countermeasures. Deeper tunnels. Cave systems were extended deeper into rock, with multiple turns to prevent direct line of sight from entrances. Spider holes. Small, concealed fighting positions positioned to ambush flamethrower operators before they could deploy. Priority targeting. Snipers and machine gunners ordered to shoot anyone carrying a flamethrower first. Explosive traps. Mines and booby traps positioned along likely approach routes to flamethrower positions. Suicide attacks. Some Japanese soldiers were specifically tasked with rushing flamethrower operators to disrupt their attacks. By the time of the Okinawa invasion in April 1945, Japanese defenders had 9 months to learn from Paliliu and Iwo Jima. General Ushijima's defensive plan specifically addressed the flamethrower threat. Cave entrances were designed with multiple right-angle turns. Ventilation shafts were dug to prevent smoke and oxygen depletion. Defenders were positioned in layered depth, not concentrated at cave mouths. Counterattack teams were positioned to assault flamethrower operators. But even with these adaptations, flamethrowers remained devastatingly effective. Japanese officers noted a disturbing trend in their after-action reports. Units that had endured artillery bombardment, air strikes, and infantry assaults maintained discipline. But units subjected to repeated flamethrower attacks showed signs of psychological breakdown. Increased desertion rates, abandoning positions to hide elsewhere, reluctance to occupy forward positions, premature detonation of suicide charges, surrender rates that were previously unthinkable. One Japanese officer's diary recovered on Okinawa stated, "The flame weapon is destroying morale faster than it destroys positions. Men who would gladly die from a bullet fear the flames. Cannot blame them. I fear them too." Japanese soldiers who survived flamethrower attacks carried physical and psychological scars for life. Burns from napalm were horrific. The gel stuck to skin and continued burning. Many survivors suffered respiratory damage from smoke inhalation. But the psychological trauma was perhaps worse. Post-war interviews with Japanese veterans revealed that flamethrower attacks haunted them decades later. "I still dream about the flames. Not regular nightmares, I can still smell it. That specific smell of napalm and burning flesh. It's been 30 years. But sometimes I wake up and I can still smell it." The success of portable flamethrowers led to rapid expansion of the concept. If a man carrying 4 gallons of napalm was effective, what about a tank carrying 290 gallons? In late 1944, the U.S. Marine Corps began receiving a new weapon, the flamethrower tank. Marines called them Zippos after the popular lighter. The M4A3R3 was a standard M4A3 Sherman tank modified with a Canadian-designed flame projector replacing the bow machine gun. 290 gallons of napalm fuel in armored tanks. Compressed gas propellant system. Effective range of 60 to 80 yards. Duration of continuous fire, 80 seconds. The psychological impact was even more devastating than portable flamethrowers. 8 M4A3R3 flame tanks landed on Iwo Jima with the assault waves. Their impact was immediate. Tank-mounted flamethrowers could engage bunkers and caves from greater distances with more fuel. The armored protection allowed them to approach positions under fire. And the sheer volume of flame they projected was overwhelming. One Marine infantry officer described watching a Zippo in action. "The Sherman moved up to a cave complex that had been holding up our advance for 6 hours. It positioned itself maybe 50 yards out and let loose. The flame that came out, it was like opening the door to hell. The entire cave mouth disappeared in fire. The flames went deep inside, we could see them reflecting off the tunnel walls. It fired for maybe 20 seconds straight. When it stopped, black smoke poured out for 5 minutes. We sent a squad in to check. There were bodies everywhere, but not from burns. They'd suffocated." By Okinawa, the Marines had perfected combined flamethrower tactics. The standard cave assault. Reconnaissance identifies target cave complex. Infantry suppresses position with rifle and machine gun fire. Tank-mounted flamethrower approaches and delivers primary assault. Portable flamethrower teams move in to clear secondary positions. Demolitions seal entrances or clear remaining defenders. Infantry occupies and secures position. This systematic approach reduced American casualties to their lowest levels of the Pacific War. At Okinawa, cave-clearing casualties dropped by over 80% compared to Peleliu. The innovation didn't stop with tanks. Engineers also developed the LVT-A-4 amphibious vehicle with a mounted flamethrower. This allowed Marines to engage beach defenses and coastal caves while still in the water during amphibious assaults. The first wave of Marines landing on Okinawa included flame-equipped LVTs that suppressed bunkers during the approach. Japanese defenders who had prepared to fire on landing craft from concrete bunkers found themselves under flame attack before Marines even reached the beach. The M2-2 also received continuous improvements throughout 1944 to 1945. Improved fuel mixture for longer burning duration. Better seals to prevent fuel leaks. Modified pressure regulator for more consistent range. Quick release harness for emergency bailout. Improved ignition system with backup firing mechanism. These modifications increased reliability and operator survival rates. By mid-1945, flamethrowers had become a core part of Marine infantry doctrine. Every rifle company had dedicated flamethrower teams. Training emphasized not just operation, but tactical employment. Mock Japanese fortifications were built at training bases in Hawaii for realistic practice. Marine infantry officers studied after-action reports from every Pacific battle to refine tactics. The weapon had evolved from an experimental tool to an essential component of American infantry power. By the end of the war, over 14,000 M2-2 portable flamethrowers were produced. Approximately 800 flamethrower tanks were deployed to the Pacific. An estimated 70% of Japanese fortified positions in the last year of the war were neutralized with flamethrower assistance. American casualties in cave and bunker clearing operations decreased by 75% from Peleliu to Okinawa. The effectiveness of the flamethrower came at a terrible price for both sides. Flamethrower operators had one of the highest casualty rates in the Marine Corps. At Iwo Jima, nearly half of all flamethrower operators became casualties. Those who had been burned carried visible scars that marked them for life. In the decades after the war, some American veterans and Japanese survivors met. These meetings were often emotional and difficult, but many found a degree of peace in acknowledging their shared humanity. One meeting on Iwo Jima in 1985 brought together American Marines and Japanese survivors. A Japanese veteran who had survived a flamethrower attack met the American who had operated the weapon that day. They stood together at the site of the cave where it happened. The Japanese veteran said through a translator, "You did your duty. I did mine. We both survived. That is enough." They shook hands. Two old men who had once tried to kill each other, now just grateful to have lived. The M2-2 flamethrower was a weapon born of necessity. American forces faced an enemy that had perfected defensive warfare. Traditional weapons were insufficient, so American ingenuity produced a tool that changed the nature of Pacific combat. Without flamethrowers, the Pacific War would have lasted longer and cost exponentially more lives. Military historians estimate that without portable and tank-mounted flamethrowers, Iwo Jima would have required 3 to 4 months to secure instead of 36 days. Okinawa might have lasted until late 1945 or early 1946. An invasion of mainland Japan would have been even more catastrophic than projected. The flamethrower was one of several weapons, along with the proximity fuse, improved amphibious vehicles, and overwhelming naval and air power, that gave America the ability to defeat Japan's defensive strategy. But we must acknowledge the moral complexity. The flamethrower was terrible. It inflicted horrific deaths on its victims. It traumatized those who used it. In today's world, we might recoil from such a weapon. But in the context of World War II, a total war against an enemy that refused to surrender, American commanders made a calculation. Better to use terrible weapons that ended the war quickly than to drag out the conflict with conventional weapons, resulting in even more deaths on both sides. Whether that calculation was correct remains debated. The portable infantry flamethrower was phased out of U.S. military service by 1978. Modern warfare moved away from close-quarters cave fighting. Precision-guided munitions and thermobaric weapons replaced the flamethrower's role. But the lessons learned in the Pacific about combined arms tactics, psychological warfare, and adapting weapons to specific combat environments remain relevant. Today, the battlefields where flamethrowers saw their heaviest use are memorials. Iwo Jima, Peleliu, Okinawa. The caves where men fought and died have been preserved. Japanese and American veterans have visited together, paying respects to all who fell. Because in the end, the M2 flamethrower tells a story not just about technology, but about the terrible things human beings are capable of doing to each other in war. And the courage of those who carried that burden. Japanese infantry never knew that American Marines had M2 flamethrowers with 40-yard range. When they discovered the truth, it was too late. The weapon shattered their defensive strategy. It broke the psychological conditioning of soldiers trained to never surrender. And it brought the Pacific War to a conclusion that might otherwise have dragged on for years. The Marines who carried those flamethrowers saved thousands of American lives. But they paid a price physically, psychologically, and morally that few of us can truly understand. We remember their sacrifice. We honor their courage. And we hope that future generations never again need weapons like the M2 flamethrower. Thank you for watching this examination of the M2 flamethrower in the Pacific War. If you found this video informative, please like and subscribe for more detailed World War II history. What other lesser-known weapons or tactics from World War II would you like to see covered? Leave your suggestions in the comments below. Remember to honor the veterans who fought in these battles on all sides and the terrible choices they faced. Until next time.